At 11:47 p.m. on a cold Manhattan night, billionaire CEO William Hartley stood in his marble bathroom, holding what he thought would be his final solution to 3 years of unbearable pain. In his trembling hand lay enough sleeping pills to ensure he'd never have to wake up to another day of failing his 6-year-old son. The reflection staring back at him from the gold-framed mirror showed a man who had everything the world admired, yet possessed nothing his shattered heart truly needed. This was supposed to be the end of his story. But sometimes, the universe has other plans. Just as William raised his hand toward his mouth, a sound pierced through the silence of his penthouse prison, the heart-breaking whimper of little Lucas from the room next door. Not the demanding cries of a typical child, but the resigned sobbing of a boy who had learned that big emotions only brought more emptiness. For 3 years since his wife Sarah's death, William had failed at the only job that mattered, being a father to the child she'd left in his care. Lucas suffered from severe emotional attachment disorder, clinging desperately to broken toys that reminded him of his mother, spiraling into inconsolable fits when they couldn't be repaired, just like his mommy couldn't be repaired. In that bathroom, surrounded by marble and gold but drowning in despair, William faced a choice that would define everything that came next. The pills in his hand represented escape from pain. The crying child next door represented the possibility of redemption. He didn't know it yet, but in less than 24 hours, a woman with her own devastating loss would walk into their lives and teach them both that sometimes the most broken people can become the strongest families. What William was about to discover would shock even him, but first, he had to make it through this night. William's hand froze midway to his mouth as Lucas's cries grew more desperate. Through the thin walls of their palatial prison, he could hear his son's ritual of nightly heartbreak, the sound of a 6-year-old trying to piece together the remnants of a life that made sense before Mommy went to heaven. Dropping the pills back into their bottle, William walked to Lucas's room with the heavy steps of a man who knew he was about to face his greatest failure once again. What he found there was a scene that had played out hundreds of times. His beautiful boy curled in the corner, clutching the broken robot toy that Sarah had given him just weeks before the cancer claimed her voice forever. "Daddy," Lucas whispered, his blue eyes, so heartbreakingly like his mother's, brimming with tears and desperate hope. "Can you fix Robo, please? I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't cry anymore if you can just make him work again." The robot's arm hung by a single wire, its LED heart flickering weakly like Lucas's own spirit. This wasn't just any toy. It was the last tangible connection to the mother who used to sit on this very floor, her gentle hands mending whatever broke, her voice soft as silk explaining that everything can be fixed with enough love and patience, sweetheart. But love and patience had died with Sarah, leaving William a stranger in his own son's life. William knelt beside his child, his hands, so confident in boardrooms and negotiations, shaking as he examined the damaged toy. He was a man who could predict market trends, solve complex algorithms, command the respect of world leaders. Yet faced with his son's simple plea for help, he felt more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. I'll have someone look at it tomorrow," William managed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Lucas's face crumpled with the particular devastation of a child whose last hope has just been deferred indefinitely. "But Mommy always fixed things right away," he whispered. "She said broken things needed love immediately, not tomorrow." The truth was about to hit William harder than any business failure ever could, but little did he know that tomorrow would bring someone who understood broken things in ways he never imagined. Across the city, in a modest Queens apartment, another soul wrestled with the weight of unbearable loss. Jasmine Rhodes sat by her rain-streaked window, staring at a photograph she both treasured and could barely stand to see. Her 4-year-old son, Michael, smiling with the pure joy of a child who believed the world was safe because Mommy was there to protect him. 2 years ago, Jasmine had been living a completely different life. As a pediatric cardiac nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital, she was the person other parents turned to when their children's hearts were failing. She had specialized training in the most complex cases, a reputation for staying calm under pressure, and an almost supernatural ability to comfort frightened families facing their worst nightmares. But life has a cruel way of testing those who dedicate themselves to saving others. Michael had been born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a rare defect that meant his tiny heart was missing crucial components necessary for life. Despite 3 surgeries, despite around-the-clock care from the best specialists in the country, despite his mother's desperate prayers to a God who seemed to have stopped listening, Michael slipped away on a Tuesday morning, while Jasmine held his hand and sang "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," the same lullaby that Sarah Hartley had once sung to Lucas. After Michael's death, Jasmine couldn't bear to return to the hospital. How could she comfort other mothers when her own heart had been shattered beyond repair? How could she save other children when she couldn't save her own? She took temporary jobs, house cleaning, grocery delivery, anything that kept her hands busy and her mind away from the empty bedroom that still smelled like dinosaur pajamas and bubble bath. Most nights, she fell asleep on her couch because the silence of her bedroom was too much to bear. When the employment agency called about a specialized childcare position for a wealthy family dealing with trauma, Jasmine's first instinct was to refuse. She wasn't sure she had enough love left in her devastated heart to give to another child. The risk of attachment, of loss, of having to say goodbye again seemed insurmountable. But something in the coordinator's voice, a note of genuine, a desperation, made her pause. "The little boy lost his mother to cancer," the woman explained. "He's 6 years old and struggling with severe attachment issues. The father is, well, he's very successful, but he's drowning. They've been through 5 caregivers in 8 months. I won't lie to you, this is a challenging situation, but we thought that someone who truly understands loss might be able to reach them." That night, as Jasmine stared at Michael's photo, she made a decision that would change 3 lives forever, though she had no idea just how profound that change would be. The Hartley mansion loomed against the grey Manhattan sky, like a monument to success built on a foundation of sorrow. When Jasmine's modest Honda passed through the electronic gates 3 days later, she felt like Alice tumbling down a rabbit hole into a world where everything gleamed but nothing truly lived. Mrs. Patterson, the stern head housekeeper who had learned to manage a household where emotions were treated like hazardous waste, led Jasmine through hallways lined with corporate achievements and leadership awards. William's face smiled from magazine covers and charity gala photos, but Jasmine noticed what was conspicuously absent: any trace of the family that had once lived here. No pictures of Sarah, no candid moments of joy or love. Just the sterile perfection of a museum to professional success. "Master, Lucas is in his playroom," Mrs. Patterson announced with military precision. "He's been particularly difficult today." The morning caregiver resigned rather abruptly after an incident with his robot toy. Jasmine paused outside the playroom door, her hand trembling on the crystal doorknob. Through the thin wood, she could hear a sound that transported her instantly back to her own darkest nights, the broken sobbing of a child who had learned that the people supposed to fix things sometimes couldn't fix anything at all. When she opened the door, time seemed to fracture. There sat Lucas, small and fragile in a room filled with expensive toys that couldn't purchase comfort, clutching a broken robot with the same desperate attachment she had once seen Michael show to his favorite stuffed elephant during those final hospital days. The boy looked up at her with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young, the premature wisdom of a child who had learned that the people you love most can disappear without warning, leaving behind only broken pieces that no amount of money could repair. "Are you going to leave too?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of someone who had already been abandoned by 5 other caregivers who couldn't handle his pain. The question hit Jasmine like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it was so familiar. How many times had she asked the same question in different words? How many times had she wondered if everyone she loved was destined to disappear? Instead of offering false promises or empty reassurances, Jasmine did something that would change everything. She sat down on the floor at Lucas's eye level, not hovering over him like an authority figure, not rushing to fix or change or improve him, just being present in his pain without trying to escape it. "I don't know," she answered with honesty. That cut through years of adult platitudes and professional distance. "But I'm here right now, and sometimes right now is all any of us really have." In that moment, neither of them knew they had just taken the first step toward healing each other's shattered hearts. But upstairs, a father watching security cameras was about to witness something that would crack open his own frozen world. 3 days into Jasmine's employment, William watched the security monitors from his home office with the intensity of a man studying market fluctuations. What he saw confused and unsettled him in ways he couldn't articulate. Jasmine wasn't following any of the protocols established by previous caregivers. She didn't redirect Lucas when he played inappropriately. She didn't discourage his emotional outbursts or attempt to impose the structured schedule William had designed for optimal child development. Instead, she did something revolutionary. She listened. When Lucas threw himself on the floor because his robot wouldn't work properly, instead of scolding him or offering immediate solutions, Jasmine simply sat beside him. She didn't speak. She didn't touch him. She just existed in his pain without trying to fix it or rush him through it. "Aren't you going to tell me to stop crying?" Lucas asked between sobs, genuinely confused by this new response to his emotions. "Why would I do that?" Jasmine asked back. "Crying is what hearts do when they're too full of hurt to hold it all inside. Your heart is just doing its job." William found himself leaning closer to the monitor, his business calls forgotten. No one had ever explained emotions to Lucas this way, as natural processes rather than inconvenient disruptions to be managed and controlled. But what truly stopped William's breath was what happened next. Without fanfare or announcement, Jasmine opened her small toolkit and began working on the broken robot. Her movements were methodical, gentle, purposeful. She didn't promise it would be perfect. She didn't rush to distract Lucas from his feelings. She simply began the quiet work of repair, while honoring the importance of what was broken. "My mummy used to fix my toys," Lucas whispered, watching Jasmine's hands move with the same careful attention Sarah had once shown. "Tell me about her," Jasmine replied, not looking up from her work but listening with her whole being. For the next 30 minutes, Lucas talked about his mother in ways William had never heard, not with the desperate grief that usually accompanied her memory, but with the warm remembrance of a child beginning to understand that love doesn't die just because people do. When the robot's lights blinked back to life, Lucas didn't grab it immediately. Instead, he looked at Jasmine with something William hadn't seen in his son's eyes for 3 years. "Trust. Thank you," the boy whispered. "Not just for fixing Robo, for listening about Mommy." That night, for the first time since Sarah's death, Lucas fell asleep without crying, and for the first time in years, William forgot to take his sleeping pills. But this newfound peace was about to be tested when William decided to confront the woman who was quietly dismantling everything he deep thought he knew about parenting. By the end of the first week, William's carefully constructed world began showing cracks. His morning briefings were interrupted by sounds he hadn't heard in years, genuine laughter floating up from the garden where Jasmine and Lucas played in the dirt, planting seeds that might or might not grow. His evening conference calls competed with the unfamiliar melody of his son, asking questions about everything, from why flowers needed rain to whether his mommy could see him from heaven. The final straw came when William discovered that Jasmine had allowed Lucas to eat his afternoon snack with his hands, something explicitly forbidden in the household rules William had established. Proper nutrition, proper etiquette, proper behavior. These were the foundations upon which successful people built successful children. He found them in the kitchen, Lucas giggling as he licked peanut butter directly from a spoon, while Jasmine cut apple slices without concern for the mess being created. "This is unacceptable," William announced from the doorway, his voice carrying the authority that commanded boardrooms and bent competitors to his will. Jasmine looked up calmly, while Lucas immediately froze, the joy draining from his face like water from a broken cup. "What specifically concerns you?" she asked, her tone respectful but unintimidated. William gestured at the scene before him. Crumbs on the counter, sticky fingers, a child being allowed to eat like a child. I don't pay you to let my son develop bad habits. There are standards in this house. I see, Jasmine replied, gently cleaning Lucas's hands with a warm washcloth. And what standard does joy fall under? What category should we file laughter in? Because that's what I see here. A little boy remembering how to be happy. The words hit William like a slap. Happiness doesn't require chaos. And order doesn't require emptiness, Jasmine responded, her voice still gentle but now carrying a strength that reminded William uncomfortably of Sarah's quiet determination. Lucas needs a father, not a supervisor. He needs love, not just rules. You don't know what you're talking about, William snapped, feeling defensive in a way that made him angry at himself. I've given him everything, the best schools, the best opportunities, everything money can provide. Jasmine stood slowly, her eyes meeting his with a directness that made him want to look away. Everything except yourself. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas had pressed himself against the kitchen island, watching this battle of wills between the two adults who now represented his entire world. You can't buy love, Mr. Hartley, Jasmine continued, her voice softening. You can't purchase connection or manufacture meaning. Lucas doesn't need another expensive toy. He needs his father to sit on the floor and play with him. He needs you to see him, not just manage him. William felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking exactly, but shifting in a way that was both terrifying and oddly relieving. I don't know how, he admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. Then learn, Jasmine replied simply. The same way you learn to build a company or close a deal. Start small. Start with 5 minutes. Start with trying. William's world had just been turned upside down by a woman who dared to speak truths no one else would say. But the real transformation was about to begin when Lucas asked him a question that would haunt him for days. Over the following 2 weeks, something extraordinary began happening in the Hartley household. So subtle at first that William almost missed it. Lucas started speaking in full sentences instead of whispered words. He began asking for things instead of simply accepting whatever was given. Most remarkably, he started seeking out interaction instead of hiding from it. Jassies, Lucas said one evening as Jasmine helped him with his bath. Do you think my daddy loves me? The question hung in the air like a bird, uncertain where to land. Jasmine paused, washcloth in hand, feeling the weight of a child's entire emotional world balanced on her response. What do you think? She asked gently, following her instinct to help him explore his own feelings rather than providing easy answers. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, soap bubbles popping around him like tiny wishes. I don't know. He buys me things. But he never hugs me. Mommy used to hug me every day. Some people love very deeply but don't know how to show it, Jasmine explained, her heart breaking for both the little boy and the father who was likely standing just outside the door, listening to this conversation that revealed his deepest failure. How do you know if someone loves you if they don't show it? Lucas asked with the devastating logic of a 6-year-old. You watch how they worry about you, Jasmine replied, thinking of William's constant monitoring, his detailed instructions, his obvious anxiety about every aspect of Lucas's well-being. You notice when they change their whole life to try to keep you safe. Sometimes love looks like protection instead of hugs. Unknown to them both, William was indeed standing outside the bathroom door, his hand pressed against the wall as if that could steady his suddenly unsteady world. He heard his son's next words with crystal clarity. I wish Daddy knew it was okay to hug me. I wouldn't break. That night, William lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Lucas's innocent words echoing in his mind. I wouldn't break. When had he started treating his son like fragile glass, instead of a resilient human being who needed connection more than protection? The next morning brought a small miracle disguised as an ordinary Tuesday. William found himself standing outside, Lucas's playroom, watching through the cracked door as his son built elaborate Lego structures while chattering away to Jasmine about his architectural plans. "I'm building a house where sad people can come to feel better," Lucas explained seriously. "It has extra big windows so they can see the sunshine and a kitchen where they can eat cookies whenever they want." "That sounds like a very important house," Jasmine replied, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him. "Who taught you that architecture could help heal feelings?" "Mommy did," Lucas said matter-of-factly. "She said our house was supposed to be a place where love lived. But after she went to heaven, I think the love got lost." Without thinking, without planning, without consulting the carefully structured schedule that governed every moment of his day, William opened the door and walked into the room. "Maybe," he said quietly, settling onto the floor beside his son with awkward formality. "Maybe we could build that house together." Lucas looked up at his father with such hope it was almost blinding. "Really, Daddy, you want to build with me?" "Yes," William said, his voice rough with emotions he'd forgotten he possessed. "I want to learn how to build the kind of house where love can live again." This tentative first step toward connection was just the beginning, but their fragile progress was about to face its first devastating test when fever struck Lucas and old wounds were torn wide open. If love were easy, everyone would be good at it. But love, real love, requires us to face the parts of ourselves we've spent years avoiding. For William, that reckoning came 3 weeks into this new dynamic, on a night when autumn rain turned to sleet against the mansion's windows, and Lucas woke up burning with fever. It started as a simple cold, but by midnight, the 6-year-old was delirious, his small body racked with chills as his temperature spiked to dangerous levels. William paced the hallway like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear as he demanded that the family pediatrician make a house call immediately. But it was Jasmine who remained calm in the storm, her nursing training taking over as she monitored Lucas's breathing, adjusted cooling blankets, and administered fever reducers with practiced precision. She sat beside his bed through the long hours of the night, her hand cool against his burning forehead, her voice soft and steady as she sang the same lullaby that had once comforted another little boy in another life. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." William froze in the doorway when he heard the melody. It was Sarah's song, the lullaby she had sung every night, the melody that had been buried with her because it hurt too much to remember. Hearing it now in Jasmine's gentle voice, bringing comfort to his fevered son, shattered something inside him that had been barely holding together. "Stop," he commanded, his voice sharp with pain and anger. "Stop singing that song." Jasmine looked up, seeing not just anger in William's eyes, but raw, unprocessed grief that had been festering for 3 years. "William, don't," he cut her off, his voice breaking. "Don't you dare use her memory to manipulate my son. You have no right to take something that belonged to her." "I'm not trying to replace anyone," Jasmine said quietly, continuing to stroke Lucas's hair as the feverish boy stirred restlessly. "I'm just trying to comfort him. With her song, with her words. What's next? Are you going to start wearing her clothes? Sleeping in her bed?" William's voice rose with each accusation, 3 years of suppressed rage finally finding a target. "Daddy?" Lucas's small voice cut through the argument like a knife. "Please don't yell at Jazz. She was helping me feel better." The sight of his sick son trying to mediate an adult conflict was like a bucket of ice water thrown over William's fury. But the damage was done. Jasmine stood slowly, her dignity intact, but her heart clearly wounded. "I'll stay until his fever breaks," she said, quietly. "Then I think it would be best if I left." "Fine," William snapped, immediately regretting the word but too proud and too hurt to take it back. For the rest of the night, Jasmine tended to Lucas with unwavering devotion while William sat in his office, staring at his computer screen without seeing anything, wrestling with the realization that he had just driven away the first person in 3 years who had made his son smile. As dawn broke over the city, Lucas's fever finally broke too. But something else had broken in the process. The fragile trust that had been building between a wounded father and a caring woman who had dared to love his child. Grief has a way of turning our greatest fears into our cruelest weapons. When we're afraid of being replaced, we sometimes destroy the very thing that could heal us. But is it too late for William to realize what he's about to lose? After Jasmine left that morning, the mansion felt different. Not just quiet, but hollow in a way that reminded William uncomfortably of the months immediately following Sarah's death. Lucas ate his breakfast in silence, his small face pale and withdrawn, the spark that Jasmine had kindled dimming back to the resigned emptiness William had grown accustomed to seeing. "Where's Jas?" Lucas asked finally, his voice small and confused. "She had to go," William replied, hating himself for the relief he saw flood his son's eyes when he added, "But it's temporary. She'll be back." He wasn't sure if that was true, but he couldn't bear to see Lucas lose someone else he cared about. That afternoon, while Lucas napped, William found himself doing something he hadn't done in months, reviewing the security footage not to monitor his son's activities, but to understand what he might have lost. Hours of recordings revealed a truth that cut him to his core. There was Jasmine, night after night, sitting beside Lucas's bed during thunderstorms because the boy was afraid of loud noises. There she was, patiently rebuilding the same robot. Toy a dozen times because Lucas needed the security of routine repair. There she was in the early morning hours, crying quietly in the garden while she thought no one was watching, grieving her own lost child while pouring love into someone else's. In one particularly devastating clip, he watched Jasmine explain to Lucas why some people go to heaven. "When people we love go to heaven, they don't stop loving us," she had said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "They just love us from a different place. And sometimes they send other people to help us remember that we're still worth loving." "Did someone send you to help me remember?" Lucas had asked with the devastating innocence of childhood. "Maybe," Jasmine had whispered, "or maybe you were sent to help me remember too." William closed the laptop with shaking hands, finally understanding what he had witnessed and what he had destroyed. Jasmine hadn't been trying to replace Sarah. She had been honoring her memory by loving the child Sarah had left behind. She had been teaching Lucas that love doesn't end with death. It transforms, multiplies, finds new vessels through which to flow. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson. "Sir, Lucas is asking when Miss Jasmine is coming back. He's been sitting by the window for 2 hours." William found his son exactly as described. Small face pressed against the glass, watching the driveway with the patient hope of a child who still believed that good people came back if you waited long enough. "Daddy," Lucas said without turning. Around, "Did I do something wrong? Is that why Jas left?" The question shattered whatever remained of William's protective walls. He knelt beside his son, seeing clearly for the first time in 3 years how his own unhealed grief had created another casualty. "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. Daddy did something wrong. Daddy was scared and said mean things to someone who was trying to help us." Lucas finally turned from the window, his blue eyes serious beyond his years. "Do you think if you said sorry, she might come back? Mommy always said sorry was a magic word that could fix almost anything." Looking into his son's hopeful face, William realized that some mistakes require more than words to repair. They require the courage to admit that sometimes the people we push away are the ones we need most. The hardest person to forgive is often ourselves, especially when our pain has caused pain to others. But what happens when a father realizes that healing isn't about protecting his heart, it's about opening it? The next 4 days passed like a slow-motion disaster. Lucas went through the motions of his daily routine, but the light had gone out of his eyes again. He stopped asking questions. He stopped laughing. He stopped breaking things, which somehow felt worse than when he was destroying robots and crying. At least then he had been feeling something. William threw himself into work with the same desperate intensity he'd shown after Sarah's death, taking meetings at all hours, reviewing contracts until his eyes burned, anything to avoid the accusation he saw in his son's increasingly hollow gaze. But business success felt meaningless when your 6-year-old son looked at you like you were just another stranger who lived in his house. On Thursday evening, Mrs. Patterson knocked on his office door with unusual hesitancy. "Sir?" "Master Lucas hasn't eaten dinner or lunch. He says his tummy hurts, but I think he's just sad." William found Lucas in his playroom, sitting in the exact spot where Jasmine used to read him stories, clutching the robot she had repaired. The toy was working perfectly, but Lucas wasn't playing with it, just holding it like a talisman against the loneliness that had crept back into his world. "Hey, buddy," William said, settling onto the floor with an awkwardness that reminded him how much he still had to learn about being present with his child. "Mrs. Patterson says you're not feeling well." "I'm okay," Lucas replied in the automatic way children do when they don't want to burden adults with their emotions. "It's okay not to be okay," William said, remembering Jasmine's words and trying them out for himself. "Sometimes when people we care about go away, our whole body feels sad, not just our hearts." Lucas looked up at his father with surprise. "You know about that?" "Yeah," William admitted. "I felt that way when Mommy went to heaven, and I've been feeling that way since Jazz left too." They sat in silence for a moment, father and son united in their shared sense of loss. "Do you miss her?" Lucas asked quietly. William considered lying, giving some adult explanation about professional arrangements and temporary situations. Instead, he chose truth. "Very much. I miss how she made you laugh. I miss how she made our house feel like a home again. I miss how she helped me remember that it's okay to feel things." "Then why did you make her go away?" the question was asked. Without accusation, just the genuine confusion of a child trying to understand why adults sometimes choose to be unhappy. "Because I was scared," William admitted, the words feeling foreign but necessary. "I was scared that if I cared about her too much, something bad might happen, like what happened to Mommy. I was scared that you might love her more than you love me. I was scared of a lot of things, and scared people sometimes do stupid things." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation with the serious concentration he usually reserved for building complicated Lego structures. "Daddy," he said finally, "do you think Jazz was scared too? When her little boy went to heaven, do you think she was scared to love me?" The wisdom of his 6-year-old son hit William like a revelation. Of course, Jasmine had been scared. Of course, she had risked her own heart to care for a child who might be taken from her by circumstance, if not by death. She had chosen courage over fear, love over safety, and he had punished her for it. "I think she was very scared," William said quietly. "But she was brave enough to love you anyway." "Then maybe," Lucas said with the hopeful pragmatism of childhood, "maybe you could be brave too." That simple question from a 6-year-old would set in motion a chain of events that would either save their family or destroy William's entire world, starting with a phone call that would change everything. That night, William did something he hadn't done since building his company from scratch. He researched with the intensity of a man whose life depended on the outcome. But instead of market trends and competitor analysis, he dove deep into understanding the woman he had so carelessly dismissed. Jasmine Rhodes, 33, former pediatric nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital. Excellent performance reviews, commendations for her work with grieving families, specialized training in childhood trauma recovery. The professional records painted a picture of competence and compassion, but it was the personal details that broke his heart. Michael Rhodes, born March 15th, died August 23rd, 2 years prior. Hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Despite 3 surgeries and round-the-clock care, the little boy hadn't made it to his 5th birthday. The obituary was brief, but William could read between the lines. Beloved son of Jasmine Rhodes, who fought with the heart of a warrior and loved with the soul of an angel. No mention of a father, no family photos in the online memorial, just a young mother who had poured everything she had into saving her child and then had to find a way to live in the aftermath of losing her entire world. The timeline became clear. Jasmine had left nursing shortly after Michael's death, taking temporary jobs, moving frequently, likely struggling to find purpose in a world that had taken her reason for being. And then she had walked into their lives, seen Lucas's pain, and chosen to risk loving again. William pulled up the employment agency's initial assessment. Ms. Rhodes demonstrates exceptional intuition with traumatized children. Her own experience, With loss provides her with unusual empathy and patience. However, potential employers should be aware that she may become emotionally invested beyond professional boundaries. What the agency saw as a liability, William now recognized as Jasmine's greatest strength. She hadn't just been doing a job, she had been healing herself by helping to heal his son, and he had thrown that gift away because he was too afraid to trust in the possibility of second chances. But the final revelation came in an unexpected place: Lucas's medical records. William had rarely reviewed them in detail, trusting his pediatrician to manage the technical aspects of his son's care. But tonight, he read every note, every assessment, every recommendation. The change in Lucas's emotional stability after Jasmine's arrival was dramatic and measurable. Sleep patterns improved, appetite normalized, social interaction increased, emotional regulation became more consistent. The professional opinion was clear: Lucas has shown remarkable progress under his current caregiver's supervision. The stability of this relationship appears crucial to his continued development. William closed the laptop and walked to his son's room, finding Lucas exactly as he'd left him, curled up with the robot Jasmine had repaired, his small body tucked around it, like it could somehow bring her back. "I'm going to fix this," William whispered into the darkness, not sure if he was making a promise to his sleeping son or to himself. "I'm going to learn how to be brave enough to love the people who make our lives better." For the first time in days, Lucas smiled in his sleep, as if somehow he had heard and believed. William's newfound understanding was about to be put to the ultimate test when his desperation to make things right would lead him to do something he'd never done before: admit he was wrong and ask for help. Friday morning brought a revelation disguised as routine. William found himself standing in Lucas's doorway at breakfast time, watching his son push cereal around his bowl without eating, and realized that all his wealth, all his success, all his carefully constructed life meant nothing if the person he loved most was slowly disappearing before his eyes. "Lucas," he said, sitting down at the small table where he'd never shared a meal before, "I need to ask you something important. If I called Jazz and asked her to come back, what would you say to her?" Lucas looked up with eyes that held more hope than any 6-year-old should have to carry. "I would say I'm sorry if I was bad. I would say I missed her stories. I would say—" He paused, thinking with the seriousness of a child trying to solve an adult problem. "I would say that Daddy is sorry too, but sometimes grown-ups don't know how to use their words right." The wisdom of his son's response hit William like a physical blow. "You're right. Sometimes grown-ups are really bad at using their words, but maybe it's not too late to learn." That afternoon, William did something unprecedented. He cancelled all his meetings, cleared his calendar, and drove to Queens with Lucas in the back seat, heading toward an address he'd found in Jasmine's employment file. His hands shook on the steering wheel, not from fear of rejection, but from the terror of hope. What if she wouldn't see them? What if the damage was irreparable? What if he had waited too long to realize that pride was a poor substitute for love? Jasmine's apartment building was modest, the kind of place where people lived when they were rebuilding their lives one careful step at a time. William found himself in the unfamiliar position of being the supplicant, the one asking for grace he wasn't sure he deserved. When Jasmine opened the door, her face showed surprise, wariness, and something else, a flicker of hope she was trying to suppress. "Lucas," she said, immediately crouching to the child's eye level, her professional composure giving way to genuine affection. "How are you feeling, sweetheart? You look much better." "I missed you," Lucas said simply, the kind of truth that cuts through all adult complications and gets straight to the heart of what matters. "I missed you too," Jasmine replied, her voice catching slightly as she looked up at William. "What are you doing here?" William had rehearsed this moment during the drive, planning eloquent apologies and logical explanations for his behavior. Instead, faced with the woman who had loved his son when he didn't know how, all his carefully prepared words evaporated. "I was wrong," he said simply, "about everything. About you, about what you were doing in our home, about what we needed. I was scared and stupid, and I hurt you when you were helping us. I'm here to ask if you'll give us, another chance to get it right." Jasmine studied his face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read sincerity in the spaces between words. "What's changed, William?" "I have," he replied, and for the first time in years he meant it completely. "I've learned that protecting my heart from pain isn't worth protecting it from love. I've learned that Lucas doesn't need a perfect father. He needs a present one. And I've learned that sometimes the people who come into our lives aren't trying to replace what we've lost. They're trying to help us remember what we still have. Apologies are easy to say, but hard to mean. Real change requires more than words. It requires the willingness to be vulnerable with the people we've wronged." But will Jasmine believe that this transformation is real? "I need to think about it," Jasmine said quietly, her honesty refreshing after years of people telling William what they thought he wanted to hear. "This isn't just about a job anymore. When you let someone into your heart, when you care about a child like I care about Lucas, walking away hurts. Coming back and risking that hurt again, and that's harder." William nodded, understanding for the first time the courage it had taken for her to love his son in the first place. "What would help you trust that things could be different?" "Time," she replied simply. "And proof that you mean what you say. Lucas needs consistency, not just good intentions." Over the next week, William embarked on the most important project of his life, learning how to be the father his son needed. But instead of approaching it like a business problem to be solved, he approached it like a relationship to be nurtured. He started small. Every morning he sat with Lucas during breakfast, not checking his phone or reviewing documents, but actually listening as his son chatted about dreams and dinosaurs and the way clouds looked like animals in the sky. He discovered that Lucas had inherited Sarah's love of stories and William's analytical mind, creating elaborate narratives about the toys and characters that populated his imagination. In the evenings, William began a new ritual. Instead of retreating to his office after dinner, he joined Lucas in the playroom, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence as he remembered that play was just another form of communication, one that spoke directly to a child's heart. "Daddy," Lucas said one evening as they built a Lego castle together, "you're getting better at playing." "Thanks, buddy. I'm learning that playing with you is more important than any work I could be doing. Do you think Jazz would be proud of how much better you're getting at being my daddy?" The question caught William off guard, revealing how much his son still missed Jasmine and how closely he was watching his father's transformation. "I hope so," William admitted. "Do you think I'm ready for her to come back?" Lucas considered this, with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "Maybe we should ask her to come for dinner first, like a test. If she sees how good you're getting at being here with me, maybe she'll believe you really changed." The wisdom of his 6-year-old son continued to astound William. A test, a chance to prove that his transformation was real and lasting, not just a temporary response to crisis. That night, William called Jasmine with an invitation that felt like the most important business proposal he'd ever made. "Would you consider having dinner with us tomorrow night? Not as Lucas's caregiver, but as someone we care about, someone whose opinion matters to us. I know I don't deserve another chance, but Lucas does. And I'd like the opportunity to show you that I'm learning to be the man my son needs me to be." There was a long pause before Jasmine replied, "I'll come." "But William, this isn't about impressing me. It's about proving to yourself that you can sustain these changes when life gets complicated again. Because it will get complicated. That's what life does." "I know," William replied, "and I'm ready for that now. I'm ready to choose love over fear even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The dinner that followed would either rebuild their broken family or confirm that some damage simply cannot be repaired. But first, William had to pass the most important test of his life. The following evening, William found himself more nervous than he'd been before any board meeting or merger negotiation. He and Lucas had spent the afternoon preparing, not hiring caterers or elaborate arrangements, but actually cooking together, something William hadn't done since his college days. "Jazz likes mac and cheese," Lucas informed his father seriously as they stirred the pot together. "And she likes when people tell stories while they eat, not fancy stories, real ones about real things that happened. When Jasmine arrived, she brought flowers from her own small garden, simple daisies and wildflowers that somehow looked more beautiful than any expensive arrangement William had ever purchased. Lucas ran to greet her with the uninhibited joy of a child who had been reunited with someone precious, and William felt his heart constrict with the realization of how much light this woman brought into their world. Dinner was imperfect in all the right ways. The mac and cheese was slightly burned. Lucas spilled juice on the tablecloth. William fumbled with serving utensils like a man unaccustomed to domestic life. But for the first time since Sarah's death, their house felt like a home. "Tell Jazz about the castle we built," Lucas prompted his father, his small face glowing with pride at having something wonderful to share. William found himself describing their Lego construction project, but more than that, he found himself talking about the process of learning to play, to imagine, to see the world through his son's eyes. Jasmine listened with the careful attention she gave to everything important, occasionally asking questions that showed she understood the significance of these small transformations. The hardest part, William admitted as they cleared the dishes, together, was learning that I didn't have to be perfect to be good enough. Lucas doesn't need a superhero father. He just needs a present one. "And what have you learned about yourself?" Jasmine asked, the question carrying the weight of real evaluation. William considered carefully before answering. "I've learned that grief made me afraid of attachment, but isolation isn't protection. It's just another kind of loss. I've learned that Sarah would want Lucas to be surrounded by love, even if some of that love comes from people she never got to meet. And I've learned that sometimes the most important business decision you can make is to stop treating your family like a business." After Lucas went to bed, Jasmine and William sat in the living room, the first adult conversation they'd had without the buffer of professional distance or crisis management. "I have a confession," Jasmine said quietly. "I wasn't just caring for Lucas these past months. I was healing too. Loving him helped me remember that my capacity for love didn't die with Michael. It just found a new place to grow. I have." "Say a confession too," William replied. "I'm terrified of needing you, not just for Lucas but for myself. You make me want to be better, and that's both the most wonderful and most frightening thing I've felt in years." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found in each other's broken places the possibility of wholeness. "So where do we go from here?" Jasmine asked. "Forward," William said simply. "Together if you're willing, as a family, if you'll have us. Not because we're perfect, but because we're better together than we are apart." Their tentative steps toward becoming a family were about to face the ultimate test when the outside world discovered their unconventional arrangement and threatened to destroy everything they were building. 2 weeks after Jasmine returned to their lives, just as William began to believe that happiness might be possible again, the universe delivered a reminder that transformation is never as simple as deciding to change. It came in the form of a phone call from his lawyer on a Tuesday morning that had started with Lucas's laughter echoing through the breakfast room. "William, we have a problem. There's been a leak to the press about your personal life. Someone sold a story about Jasmine Rhodes, about her son's death, about her employment with your family. The angle is unflattering." The headline screamed from William's phone screen. "Grieving nanny infiltrates billionaire's home. Did Jasmine Rhodes target the Hartley family to replace her dead son?" The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and manipulation, painting Jasmine as a disturbed woman who had used her tragic past to gain access to wealthy families, suggesting she was emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous to children. It included photographs of her leaving the hospital after Michael's death, quotes from unnamed medical professionals questioning her mental state, and speculation about her motives for taking a position with the Hartley family. William's hands shook as he read the devastating character assassination of the woman who had brought love back into his home. But worse than the lies was the grain of truth that gave them power. Jasmine had indeed lost a child. She was indeed emotionally invested in Lucas beyond what might be considered professional, and she had indeed found healing through loving another woman's son. By midday, his phone was ringing constantly, board members expressing concern about his judgment, business partners questioning his decision-making, society acquaintances offering sympathy for his unfortunate situation with barely concealed glee at the scandal. The breaking point came when his assistant informed him that the board of directors had called an emergency meeting for that afternoon. The agenda item was simple: discussion of CEO's personal decisions and their impact on corporate reputation. William understood immediately what this meant. They weren't just questioning his relationship with Jasmine, they were questioning his fitness to lead the company he had built from nothing. They wanted him to choose his career or his heart, his legacy or his love. That evening he found Jasmine in his living room, her face pale but resolute as she held a printed copy of the article. "I'm going to resign," she said quietly. "I can't. Let my past destroy your future or Lucas's security." "No," William replied with a firmness that surprised them both. "I won't let fear make my decisions anymore. I won't let other people's judgment determine who I love or how I build my family. William, be practical. Your career, your reputation, will mean nothing if I lose the two people who make my life worth living," he interrupted. "I've spent 3 years protecting myself from pain, and all it got me was emptiness. I'd rather risk everything for love than sacrifice love for safety." Lucas appeared in the doorway, sensing the tension, even if he couldn't understand the specifics. "Is Jazz going away again?" he asked, his small voice carrying the weight of a child who had learned to expect loss. William knelt beside his son, pulling him close in a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks. "Not if I can help it, buddy. Sometimes people try to hurt the people we love, but we don't have to let them win." "How do we fight them?" Lucas asked with the serious concern of a 6-year-old ready to defend his family. "By telling the truth," William replied, looking at Jasmine over his son's head. "By choosing love over fear. By standing up for what matters most." The ultimate confrontation was coming, and William would have to risk everything he had built professionally to protect, everything he had built personally. But would his transformation be strong enough to withstand the ultimate test? The boardroom at Hartley Technologies felt different that afternoon, charged with the electricity of a battlefield, where everything William had built hung in the balance. 12 faces stared at him across the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from sympathetic concern to barely concealed hostility. Chairman Richard Morrison, who had been William's mentor for over a decade, spoke first. "William, we've known each other for years. I respect you, your vision, your achievements. But this situation with your employee, the publicity, the questions about your judgment, it's affecting investor confidence. The stock price has dropped 3% since this morning." "I understand your concerns," William replied, his voice steady despite the chaos in his heart. "But I want to be clear about something from the start. Jasmine Rhodes is not just an employee. She's the woman who saved my son's emotional life and helped me remember how to be a father. The article you've read is a character assassination based on manipulated facts and deliberate misinterpretation." Board member Susan Chen leaned forward. "Even if we accept that, William, the perception matters. You're the face of this company. Your personal decisions reflect on all of us, on our shareholders, on our employees. Can you honestly say that your judgment hasn't been compromised by emotional attachment?" William stood slowly, feeling the weight of 3 decades of ambition, pressing against 3 months of rediscovered love. "Let me tell you about compromised judgment," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Compromised judgment is letting grief turn you into a ghost in your own child's life. Compromised judgment is choosing isolation over connection because connection involves risk. Compromised judgment is building an empire while your family crumbles because you're too afraid to show up for the people who need you most." He paused, looking at each face around the table. "For 3 years after my wife died, I was CEO of this company, but I was failing at the only job that really mattered, being Lucas's father. Jasmine Rhodes didn't compromise my judgment. She restored it. She helped me remember that success without love is just expensive failure." "That's very touching," Morrison replied, "but the bottom line is that this scandal is affecting our business. The board has a responsibility to our shareholders." "Then let me make this simple for you," William said, surprising himself with the clarity of his conviction. If you want my resignation because you believe my personal life makes me unfit to lead this company, I'll give it to you. But I won't sacrifice the woman I love or my son's happiness to protect a stock price." The room fell silent, the weight of his ultimatum settling over the assembled executives like dust after an explosion. "You're willing to walk away from everything you've built?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying genuine shock. "I'm willing to walk away from what I built incorrectly to protect what I'm building right," William replied. "I spent years thinking that providing for Lucas meant accumulating wealth and status. But what he actually needed was a father who showed up, who played with him, who chose him over everything else when it mattered." He gathered his papers, preparing to leave. "You have 24 hours to decide. But understand this, whatever you choose, I've already made my decision. I choose my family, I choose love. I choose being the man my son can be proud of, over being the CEO who sacrificed everything that mattered for everything that doesn't." As William walked toward the door, he heard Susan Chen's voice behind him. "William, wait. Before you go, tell us about the changes in your son since Miss Rhodes came into your life." He turned back, seeing something different in their faces now. Not just concern for corporate liability, but curiosity about human transformation. "Lucas is becoming the child his mother always believed he could be," William said simply. "He laughs every day. He asks questions about the world. He builds things with his hands and his imagination. He's learning that it's safe to love people, because sometimes if you're very lucky, they love you back. That's what Jasmine gave us. That's what I refuse to lose." William had laid everything on the line, but the real test wasn't whether he could walk away from his career. It was whether he could build something even more valuable in its place. 48 hours after the board meeting, William discovered that courage, like fear, is contagious. The response to his ultimatum surprised everyone, most of all himself. Instead of the corporate cold shoulder he'd expected, he found unexpected. Allies emerging from corners he'd never anticipated. Susan Chen called him personally that Tuesday evening. "William, I wanted to give you a heads up before the official announcement. The board voted. It was closer than I expected, 7-5. But we've decided to issue a statement supporting you and condemning the tabloid article about Ms. Rhodes. 3 board members resigned in protest, but the majority agreed that your personal life, as long as it doesn't involve illegal activity, is not grounds for removal." William felt relief flood through him, but it was different from the desperate gratitude he might have expected. Instead, it was simply nice. Nice to keep his career. Nice to maintain the stability it provided for Lucas. Nice not to have to start over professionally. But he realized that he would have been okay even if the decision had gone the other way. "Thank you, Susan." What changed their minds? Morrison's daughter, actually. She's a single mother, and when he went home last night and told his family about the situation, she reminded him that sometimes the people who love our children best are the ones who choose to love them, not just the ones who are obligated to. She said any company that would punish a father for choosing his child's happiness over corporate image isn't a company she'd want to work for. But the real surprise came 3 days later when William received a package at his office. Inside was a handwritten letter from Margaret Thompson, the widow of one of his biggest competitors, along with a newspaper clipping from 5 years earlier that William had never seen. The letter read, "Mr. Hartley, I saw the terrible article about your family situation and felt compelled to reach out. 5 years ago, when my husband died suddenly, I was left with 3 young children and a company in crisis. The enclosed article shows what the business press wrote about my decision to hire a male nanny to help with my children. They questioned. My judgment suggested I was unstable, implied that my grief had clouded my thinking. But that man, James, became family to us. He helped me raise my children and supported me through the darkest period of my life. Today, all 3 of my children are thriving adults who credit James with helping them heal after their father's death. Sometimes the business world doesn't understand that success in life requires different metrics than success in quarterly reports. Stand firm in your choice. Your son will thank you someday." The ripple effects continued throughout the week. Lucas's School principal called to express support, mentioning that several other families had similar non-traditional arrangements that were working beautifully. The family pediatrician sent a note praising Jasmine's positive impact on Lucas's emotional development. Even Mrs. Patterson, who rarely expressed personal opinions, quietly mentioned that she'd never seen Master Lucas as happy as he'd been since Jasmine returned. Most surprisingly, William received a call from his late wife's sister, Catherine, whom he'd barely spoken to since Sarah's funeral. "William," she said, her voice warm with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. "I know we haven't talked much since Sarah died, but I needed you to know. I think Sarah would be proud of the choice you've made. She always worried that grief would turn you into someone who protected Lucas from life instead of preparing him for it. From what I hear, this woman is helping you both learn to live again. That's what Sarah would have wanted." That evening, as William sat in his garden with Jasmine and Lucas, watching his son chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, he reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. Not just in terms of external support, but in his own understanding of what it meant to live with integrity. "You know what's funny?" he said to Jasmine as they watched Lucas's delighted attempts to catch the glowing insects. "I spent so much energy building defenses against losing what I had that I almost lost what mattered most." "And now?" Jasmine asked, her hand finding his in the comfortable darkness. "Now I'm learning that the best way to protect what you love is to love it fully, risks and all." Their newfound peace was about to be tested again, but this time William was ready to face whatever came next with the confidence of a man who had learned that some things are worth fighting for. 3 months after the board's vote of confidence, the Hartley household bore little resemblance to the cold, pristine mansion where William had once lived in exile from his own life. Jasmine's presence had transformed the space not through expensive renovations or dramatic changes, but through the accumulated warmth of daily love. Children's artwork on the refrigerator, books left open on windowsills, the lingering scent of home-cooked meals, and the sound of genuine laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long. Lucas had blossomed beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Now 7 years old, he had grown from the withdrawn, anxious child William remembered into a confident, empathetic boy who seemed to understand that his family's unusual beginning made it stronger, not stranger. His teachers reported that the quiet, withdrawn child had become a natural leader, eager to share stories about his family adventures and quick to comfort classmates who seemed sad or lonely. When asked about the change, Lucas had simply explained to his second-grade teacher, "I used to think love ran out, but Jazz taught me it just grows bigger when you share it." The robot toy that had once symbolized loss and brokenness now sat on Lucas's dresser as a reminder of healing. Not because it was perfect, but because it bore the loving scars of being repaired over and over again by people who refused to give up on it. William discovered that learning to be present was like learning a new language, awkward at first but increasingly natural as he practiced. He found himself looking forward to bedtime stories more than board meetings, treasuring Lucas's random questions about clouds and dinosaurs more than quarterly reports. The man who had once scheduled his life in 15-minute increments now blocked out entire afternoons for important father business, which might involve building blanket forts, having tea parties with stuffed animals, or simply lying on the grass and making up stories about the shapes they saw in the clouds. "You know what's funny?" William said one evening as he and Jasmine cleaned up after Lucas's 7th birthday party, a joyous celebration attended by school friends, neighbors, and board members' children who had become unexpected family friends. "I used to think that loving someone meant having a plan for every possible way you could lose them. Now I think it means being brave enough to love them fully, even knowing that loss is always possible." "What changed your mind?" Jasmine asked, wrapping leftover cake with the casual domesticity that had become second nature to all of them. "You," William replied simply, "watching you love Lucas, knowing that you'd already lost a child, seeing you choose hope over fear. Every single day, it taught me that protection isn't the opposite of loss. Love is." Jasmine paused in her wrapping, touched by the recognition that her own healing journey had contributed to someone else's transformation. "Michael would have loved Lucas," she said softly. I think he would have loved our whole crazy family. Tell me about him, William said, because he had learned that honoring the past was essential to building the future. Tell me what he was like. For the next hour, as they finished cleaning and moved to the living room, where Lucas was already asleep on the couch, surrounded by the detritus of his party, Jasmine shared stories about her son, his infectious laugh, his fascination with airplanes, his habit of giving elaborate hugs that lasted exactly 7 seconds, because that was the perfect amount of love for one hug. He sounds like he was an amazing little boy, William said when she finished. He was, and loving Lucas doesn't mean I love Michael less. It just means my heart is bigger than I thought it was. William looked at his sleeping son, then at the woman who had taught them both how to love without reservation. I want to ask you something, and I want you to know there's no pressure, no expectations. You can say no and nothing changes between us. Jasmine waited, her heart steady but attentive. I want to marry you, William said simply. Not because I think we need a piece of paper to be a family, but because I want to stand up in front of everyone we love and promise to choose this, to choose us, every day for the rest of my life. I want Lucas to see that when people love each other the way we do, they make commitments. They build something together that's stronger than what they could build alone. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, considering not just the proposal, but the man who was making it, someone who had grown from emotional isolation to genuine vulnerability, who had learned to put relationship before reputation, who had chosen love over fear in ways both public and private. Yes, she said finally, her voice steady and sure. But I have one condition. Anything. We include Michael and Sarah in the ceremony somehow. Not as ghosts we're trying to escape, but as part of our story, because they're part of what made us who we are, and who we are is how we found each other. William felt tears prick his eyes, overwhelmed by gratitude for a woman who understood that honoring the past was the only way to build an authentic future. I can't think of anything more perfect, he said, pulling her close as Lucas stirred, in his sleep, unconsciously sensing the security of being surrounded by people who loved him unconditionally. Their engagement marked a new chapter, but their greatest test was still ahead, when someone from William's past arrived with the power to either bless their unconventional family or tear it apart. The wedding took place in the garden behind the Hartley mansion on a crisp October morning when the leaves were turning colors that reminded everyone that beautiful things could emerge from endings. It was a small ceremony, just family and close, friends who had witnessed the transformation of 3 separate people into one unbreakable unit. But the most important guests were represented by 2 empty chairs in the front row, one decorated with Sarah's favorite white roses, the other with a small airplane, Michael's favorite toy that Jasmine had saved from his belongings. Lucas had insisted on this memorial, explaining to anyone who would listen that Mommy and Michael are in heaven, but they're still part of our family, so they should have good seats for the wedding. William wore his finest suit, but it was his expression that made him truly handsome, the radiant joy of a man who had learned to receive love as well as give it. Jasmine walked down the aisle alone by choice, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers she and Lucas had picked that morning from their own garden, her face glowing with the serene happiness of a woman who had found her way home. But it was Lucas who stole the show, serving as both ring-bearer and emotional narrator for the proceedings. When the minister asked if anyone had reason these 2 should not be wed, Lucas stood up solemnly and announced, I have a reason they should be married. They make each other happy, they make me happy, and happy people should stick together forever. The laughter that followed was warm and knowing, the recognition of a community that had watched love triumph over fear, healing emerge from heartbreak, family form from the remnants of loss. When it came time for vows, William had prepared elaborate speeches about commitment and devotion. Instead, he found himself speaking simply and from the heart. Jasmine, you didn't just love my son, you taught me how to love him. You didn't replace what I'd lost. You helped me build something new with what remained. You showed me that broken hearts don't need to be thrown away. They need to be tended by someone who understands that the cracks are where the light gets in. I promise to choose our love every day, to choose presence over perfection, to choose courage over comfort. I promise to be the husband Lucas can be, proud of, and the father you can trust with our most precious gift." Jasmine's vows were equally simple and profound. "William, you gave me permission to love again by showing me that grieving mothers can become loving mothers in new ways. You taught me that families aren't just born, they're built by people who choose each other every day. You showed me that healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means learning to carry love forward. I promise to help you remember every day that you are worthy of love. I promise to help Lucas remember that he is worth fighting for. I promise to build with you a home where wounded hearts come to heal and healed hearts learn to soar." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas erupted in applause, shouting, "Finally!" with the satisfaction of a child who had been waiting for the adults in his life to catch up to what he'd known all along, that they belonged together. The reception was held in the same garden, with tables scattered under string lights and paper lanterns that Lucas had helped hang. Instead of formal speeches, there were stories, funny memories, touching moments, recognition of how far they'd all come from the broken people they'd been to the whole family they'd become. But the moment that would live in everyone's memory came when Lucas stood on his chair and asked for attention. "I want to make a toast," he announced with the seriousness of a 7-year-old who had something important to say. "To my daddy, who learned how to hug me. To my Jazz, who's going to be my mummy now, but she was already my mummy in my heart. And to my first mummy Sarah and my brother Michael, who I never got to meet but who sent Jazz to take care of us when we were too sad to take care of ourselves." He raised his cup of apple juice high in the air. "To families that grow from broken pieces, and love that's stronger than being scared." As the guests raised their glasses to honor the wisdom of a child who had learned that love multiplies rather than divides, that healing is possible even after devastating loss, that families can be created through choice as powerfully as through blood, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Sometimes the greatest celebration isn't of what we've gained, but of what we've learned to give. When love becomes the foundation for building new dreams, even the most wounded hearts can learn to sing. 6 months into their marriage, the Hartley family had settled into rhythms that felt both established and constantly evolving. Jasmine had officially adopted Lucas, a legal formality that meant little in terms of their emotional reality, but everything in terms of their sense of permanence and security. Lucas now introduced Jasmine as "my mum," without qualification or explanation, the natural confidence of a child who had never doubted he was loved by the woman who chose to parent him. William had made structural changes to his professional life that reflected his new priorities. He'd promoted his very capable COO to share more leadership responsibilities, freeing him to work more flexible hours and to be genuinely present for the important moments, school plays, parent-teacher conferences, bedtime stories, and the hundreds of small conversations that build trust between a parent and child. The transformation wasn't always smooth. William still struggled sometimes with his need to control situations, especially when Lucas was hurt or disappointed. Jasmine occasionally caught herself hovering protectively, her loss of Michael making her hyper-aware of all the ways children could be vulnerable. Lucas, now 7.5, had normal childhood challenges, friendship drama, academic struggles, the occasional meltdown when he couldn't find his favorite shirt or when plans changed unexpectedly. But what had changed was their approach to these inevitable difficulties. Instead of trying to prevent all problems, they had learned to navigate them together as a family unit that could bend without breaking. "You know what I realized today?" Jasmine said one evening, as she and William cleaned up after dinner while Lucas finished his homework at the kitchen table. "I spent so much time after Michael died thinking that loving another child would be betraying his memory. But loving Lucas has actually helped me understand Michael better. It's helped me see that the love I had for him wasn't wasted when he died. It was just waiting for a new place to grow." William paused in his dish drying, struck by the profound simplicity of her insight. "I think Sarah would feel the same way about us. She always said that love wasn't a finite resource, that the more you gave away, the more you had to give." Lucas looked up from his math homework, his 7-year-old brain processing the adult conversation with the seriousness he reserved for important topics. So, loving more people doesn't mean you love other people less? Exactly right, buddy, William confirmed, settling into the chair beside his son to help with a particularly challenging subtraction problem. Love isn't like money or toys where having less means someone else has more. Love is like sunshine. The more it shines, the more everything grows. That's why our family keeps getting bigger even though it's still just us three, Lucas observed with the logical precision he'd inherited from both his parents. Because we keep loving each other more, so there's more love in our house. These were the moments that convinced William and Jasmine that they had succeeded in creating something genuine. Not a replacement family trying to fill the holes left by loss, but a new family that had grown from those holes, stronger and more intentional because of what they'd all survived. The changes weren't just internal. The Hartley household had become a gathering place for other families navigating their own challenges. William's board members brought their children for playdates that turned into dinner parties, where adults shared the messy realities of parenting, while children played with the unconscious joy of being in a place where they were safe to be themselves. Jasmine had started a support group for parents who had lost children, meeting monthly in their living room to share stories, tears, and the slow work of learning to live with grief while remaining open to love. William often served as host for these gatherings, his presence a quiet testimony to the fact that men, too, could learn to navigate loss with grace and vulnerability. I never thought I'd be grateful for the worst thing that ever happened to me, Jasmine confided to the group one evening. But losing Michael taught me that love doesn't end with death, it transforms. And that transformation can become a gift to other people who need to know that it's possible to survive losing everything and still find reasons to hope. Lucas had become the unofficial mascot of these gatherings, moving among the grieving adults, with the intuitive compassion of a child who understood loss but had learned that it wasn't the end of the story. He would offer quiet hugs, share his toys with visiting children, and occasionally contribute observations that cut straight to the heart of complex emotional truths. Mrs. Patterson says people die when their bodies stop working, he announced to the group one evening, but I think people only really die when everyone stops remembering them. So as long as we keep talking about the people we miss, they're still kind of alive in our hearts. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the profound quiet of people recognizing wisdom when they heard it, even from the mouth of a 7-year-old who had learned that death and love could coexist in the same heart. Healing isn't a destination, it's a way of traveling through life. When we learn to carry our losses as sources of strength rather than sources of shame, we become beacons of hope for others walking similar paths. Just when life had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable and joyful, the universe presented the Hartley family with a test that none of them had anticipated. It came in the form of Eleanor Hartley, William's mother, who arrived unannounced on a crisp November afternoon with enough luggage to suggest an extended stay and enough disapproval to cloud the atmosphere of their carefully cultivated home. Eleanor was a formidable woman in her 70s, a product of old money expectations and social conventions that had little room for the kind of unconventional family her son had created. She had attended the wedding with polite restraint, offering congratulations that sounded more like condolences, and had maintained minimal contact since then, until now. "William," she announced from the foyer, her imperious gaze taking in the children's artwork on the walls, the comfortable disorder of a home where people actually lived, the evidence of a life built around love rather than appearances. "We need to talk." Lucas, who had been playing in the living room, appeared in the doorway with the cautious curiosity of a child, encountering someone whose approval he couldn't automatically assume. He'd met his grandmother only briefly at the wedding, and her austere presence was a sharp contrast to the warmth he'd learned to expect from the adults in his life. "Hello, Grandmother Eleanor," he said politely, using the formal address she had insisted upon rather than the casual grandma that came naturally to him. Eleanor's expression softened slightly at the sight of her grandson. It was impossible to look at Lucas without seeing Sarah's eyes and William's determined chin, but her voice remained cool. "Hello, Lucas. Where is Jasmine?" The slight hesitation before saying Jasmine's name spoke volumes about Eleanor's feelings, regarding her daughter-in-law's place in the family hierarchy. When Jasmine appeared from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron from the cookies she'd been baking with Lucas, Eleanor's disapproval became palpable. Here was a woman who believed that hired help should remain hired help, that boundaries shouldn't be crossed, that certain social conventions existed for good reason. "Eleanor," Jasmine said warmly, moving to embrace her mother-in-law despite the older woman's obvious reluctance. "What a lovely surprise. Lucas and I were just making cookies. Would you like some tea?" "I didn't come for social pleasantries," Eleanor replied crisply. "I came because I'm concerned about my grandson's welfare. I've been hearing things, Jasmine, disturbing things about your background, your previous loss, your emotional stability." The words hit the room like physical blows. Lucas, who didn't understand all the implications but recognized hostility when he heard it, moved instinctively closer to Jasmine. William, who had been upstairs on a conference call, appeared on the landing, his expression darkening as he realized what was happening. "Mother," he said, his voice carrying a warning that Eleanor chose to ignore. "Don't mother me, William. Someone has to think clearly about this situation. This woman has inserted herself into your life during a vulnerable period. She's using your grief and Lucas's need for maternal attention to secure her own position. And now she has legal rights to your son. It's unseemly, it's dangerous. It's love," Jasmine said quietly, her voice steady despite the pain of being reduced to a calculating opportunist. "I understand that from the outside, our situation might look unconventional." "Unconventional," Eleanor interrupted. "You're a domestic employee who has manipulated her way into a position of legal authority over my grandson. You've exploited a child's attachment disorder and a widower's loneliness for your own benefit." "That's enough," William said, descending the stairs with the controlled fury of a man who had learned to choose his battles carefully, but would not compromise when it came to protecting his family. "Mother, I understand your concern, but you are completely wrong about Jasmine's motives and her character." "Am I? Then explain to me how a woman who lost her own child just happened to find employment with a family in similar circumstances. Explain the convenient timing, the emotional manipulation, the way she's positioned herself as indispensable to both you and Lucas." Lucas, who had been listening with growing distress, suddenly stepped forward with the fierce protectiveness of a child defending someone he loved. "Stop being mean to my mum," he said, his young voice shaking with emotion. "Jazz didn't trick us. She loves us and we love her. And love isn't a trick. It's the best thing in the whole world." The room fell silent, Eleanor's shocked expression revealing that she hadn't expected such vehement defense from her 7-year-old grandson. Lucas's outburst had laid bare the emotional reality that existed beneath the surface of her suspicions. This wasn't a calculated deception, but a genuine family bond that had formed organically from shared need and mutual affection. "Lucas," Eleanor said, her voice gentler now, "you're too young to understand how complicated adult relationships can be. I understand that before Jazz came, Daddy was sad all the time and I was sad all the time," Lucas interrupted with the devastating honesty of childhood. "And now we're happy. Why would you want us to go back to being sad? Sometimes the people who claim to protect us are the ones who threaten what we hold most dear. When family loyalty conflicts with family love, which should win? The answer might surprise you." Eleanor's challenge forced the family to articulate what they had been living but hadn't needed to defend. The authenticity of their love, the legitimacy of their choices, the reality of their transformation from 3 broken people into one resilient family unit. That evening, after Eleanor had been settled in the guest room with chilly politeness, William, Jasmine, and Lucas sat together in the living room, processing the day's emotional upheaval. The familiar warmth of their evening routine felt more precious now that it had been questioned, more intentional now that they had been forced to examine its foundations. "So are you worried that Grandmother Eleanor might be right?" Lucas asked with the direct simplicity that always cut straight to the heart of adult complications. "That maybe Jazz only loves us because she misses Michael?" Jasmine pulled Lucas onto her lap, feeling the familiar weight of his trust and the responsibility that came with it. In the soft lamplight of their living room, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of their shared life. Lucas's artwork on the refrigerator, William's reading glasses folded carefully on the side table, her own coffee mug still bearing the faint lipstick print from that morning. She searched for words that would reassure, without dismissing his legitimate concerns. "Do you know how I can tell the difference between missing Michael and loving you?" she asked, smoothing his hair with gentle fingers that remembered performing this same gesture for another child who would never grow older. Lucas shook his head, waiting for wisdom with the patience of a child who had learned that important questions deserved thoughtful answers. "When I think about Michael, my heart feels warm but sad, like remembering a beautiful song that ended too soon. When I think about you, my heart feels warm and excited, like listening to a beautiful song that's still being written. Both feelings are real, but they're completely different kinds of love." "What about Daddy?" Lucas asked, turning to William, with the complete trust of a child who had learned that adults in his life would tell him the truth, even when it was complicated. "Do you love Jazz because she reminds you of Mommy Sarah?" William considered the question seriously, understanding that his son needed absolute honesty to feel secure in their family structure. The comparison had occurred to him in the early days of his relationship with Jasmine, not because she reminded him of Sarah, but precisely because she didn't. Where Sarah had been spontaneous and effervescent, Jasmine was thoughtful and grounded. Where Sarah had approached life with joyful abandon, Jasmine moved through the world with the careful wisdom of someone who had learned that beautiful things could be lost without warning. "Jazz doesn't remind me of Mommy Sarah at all," he said. "Mommy was wonderful, but she was different from Jazz. I love Jazz because of who she is, not because of who she isn't or who she reminds me of. I love her because she makes me want to be the best version of myself. I love her because she loves you so completely. I love her because when I'm with her, I remember that life can be beautiful, even after terrible things happen." Lucas nodded, with the satisfaction of a child whose fundamental security had been confirmed. "So Grandmother Eleanor is wrong?" "Grandmother Eleanor is scared," Jasmine corrected gently. "She's afraid that if she accepts our family, it means she has to let go of the family that came before. But love isn't like that. Loving our new family doesn't dishonor the memory of the people we've lost. It honors their hope that we would find ways to be happy again." The next morning brought a conversation that had been building since Eleanor's arrival. She found William in the kitchen, already dressed for work but moving slowly, as if reluctant to leave his family to face her disapproval alone. The morning light streamed through the window where Jasmine had hung herb planters, where Lucas's finger paintings were taped to the glass, where evidence of their shared life accumulated in small daily gestures of belonging. "We need to finish our discussion," Eleanor announced, accepting the coffee he offered with grudging acknowledgement of his courtesy. "Actually, Mother, I think we need to start a completely different discussion," William replied, settling across from her at the kitchen table where he had once sat alone with his grief, where Lucas now did his homework while Jasmine prepared dinner, where they had planned their wedding and their future with the careful optimism of people who had learned not to take happiness for granted. "I think we need to talk about what it means to honor Sarah's memory and what it means to build a life after loss." Eleanor's carefully controlled expression flickered with something that might have been pain. "Don't lecture me about honoring Sarah's memory. I love that girl like my own daughter. I know you did. And I think Sarah would want Lucas to grow up in a home full of love, even if that love comes from someone she never met. I think she would want me to be the kind of father who could recognize a gift when it was offered and be grateful enough to accept it." "You think I'm ungrateful?" Eleanor asked, her voice sharp with defensive hurt. "I think you're afraid," William said gently. "I think you're afraid that if you admit Jasmine is good for us, it means you failed to help us after Sarah died. But Mother, no one could have helped us then. We were too broken, too scared, too lost in our own grief. Jasmine didn't fix us because she was better than you. She helped us because we were finally ready to be helped." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee as if it held answers to questions she hadn't known she was asking. Through the kitchen window, she could see Lucas's bicycle propped against the garden shed, Jasmine's reading chair positioned to catch the afternoon sun, William's work boots lined up neatly by the back door, Evidence of a life rebuilt. Evidence of healing that had happened without her. Evidence of love that had grown in soil she hadn't tended. "I've been alone for 15 years since your father died," she said finally, her voice smaller than William had ever heard it. "I never found anyone else, never even tried. Maybe I can't understand how you could move forward, because I never figured out how to do it myself." The admission hung in the air between them, a recognition of the grief that had shaped Eleanor's resistance to their happiness. William saw, perhaps for the first time, that his mother's disapproval wasn't rooted in judgment, but in her own unprocessed loss, her own failure to imagine that life could be rebuilt rather than simply endured. "It's not too late," William said softly, "to learn how to live with loss without being defined by it, to see that Lucas gaining a loving mother doesn't mean he loses his connection to his first mother, to understand that families can grow in ways we never expected." When Jasmine appeared in the doorway with Lucas, both of them hesitant to interrupt but drawn by the sound of honest conversation, Eleanor looked up with eyes that held tears she'd been holding back for years. "I owe you an apology," she said. To Jasmine, her voice formal but sincere. "I let my own fears and prejudices cloud my judgment about your character and your intentions. I can see that you love my grandson genuinely, and that he loves you. I can see that you've made my son happy in ways I couldn't. That should be enough for me to welcome you, not enough for me to resent you." Jasmine crossed the room with the grace of a woman who understood that forgiveness was often more important than the apology that preceded it. "We all want what's best for Lucas," she said, offering Eleanor the peace of shared purpose. "Maybe we can figure out together what that looks like." Lucas, who had been watching this adult drama with the intensity of someone whose entire world depended on its resolution, stepped forward with the diplomatic wisdom of a child who had learned to navigate complex emotional terrain. "Grandmother." "Eleanor," he said seriously, "would you like to help us make cookies today? Jazz teaches really good cookie lessons, and I bet you have some good cookie secrets too." Eleanor looked down at her grandson, this resilient, loving child who had somehow learned to build bridges where adults wanted to build walls, and felt something shift in her chest, some long-held resistance finally giving way to acceptance. "I'd like that very much," she said, and for the first time since her arrival, her smile was genuine. Healing happens in circles, not straight lines. When we're brave enough to admit our fears and wise enough to seek understanding, even the most damaged relationships can find their way back to love. 9 months after Eleanor's challenging visit, which had eventually evolved into an extended stay that benefited everyone, the Hartley family gathered in their garden for a celebration that perfectly captured how much their definition of family had expanded. It was Lucas's 8th birthday, but more than that, it was a celebration of how love multiplies when it's given freely and accepted gracefully. The guest list reflected the organic community that had grown around their unconventional family. Lucas's school friends and their parents, Jasmine's grief support group, William's colleagues who had become genuine friends, neighbors who had been drawn into their circle of warmth, and Eleanor, who had taken on the role of family matriarch with the enthusiasm of someone who had rediscovered the joy of belonging. "You know what I love about this family," said Margaret Chen, one of Jasmine's grief group members, as she watched Lucas command the attention of a mixed-age audience while he demonstrated his latest Lego creation. "You can see how each person's healing has contributed to everyone else's growth. It's like emotional recycling. Nothing gets wasted, even the broken pieces become part of something beautiful." Eleanor, who was supervising the cake cutting with the precision of a woman who had finally found a way to be useful instead of merely ornamental, overheard the comment and smiled. "I think that's exactly right. When I first met Jasmine, I saw her as a threat to Sarah's memory, but I've learned that memory isn't fragile, it's resilient, and honoring the past doesn't require rejecting the present." William watched his mother interact with his wife and son, marveling at the transformation that had occurred not just in his immediate family, but in the entire constellation of relationships that surrounded them. Eleanor had become a source of stability and wisdom, her own experience with loss finally channeled into supporting others rather than protecting herself. Dad, Lucas called from across the garden, where he was organizing an elaborate treasure hunt for his younger guests. "Can you help me with the clues? I want them to be hard enough to be fun, but not so hard that anyone cries." The request was so perfectly Lucas, thoughtful, inclusive, aware of others' emotional needs while still wanting to create something challenging and engaging. William had no idea how his son had developed such sophisticated social intelligence, but he suspected it had something to do with growing up in a household where emotions were acknowledged rather than suppressed, where different kinds of love were celebrated rather than ranked, where healing was seen as a community project rather than an individual achievement. As the afternoon progressed, William found himself in conversation with Dr. Martinez, Lucas's school counselor, who had been tracking his son's development with professional interest and personal investment. "I have to tell you," Dr. Martinez said, "Lucas has become something of a legend among the faculty, not just because of his academic progress, but because of his emotional intelligence. He's the child other children seek out when they're upset. He has this remarkable ability to help his peers feel heard and valued. We've never seen anything like it in someone so young." "He's had good teachers," William replied, his eyes finding Jasmine across the garden as she helped Eleanor distribute cake to the assembled guests. "Yes, but it's more than that. Lucas has learned that healing is possible, that families can be rebuilt, that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. That's not knowledge you can teach. It's wisdom you can only gain through experience. And now, he's passing that wisdom on to other children, who need to know that difficult things don't have to be permanent things." As if summoned by their conversation, Lucas appeared beside them, his face flushed with the joy of successful party hosting. "Dr. Martinez," he exclaimed, clearly delighted to see his counselor at his birthday celebration. "Did you try the cake?" "Grandmother Eleanor and Mom made it together, and it has 3 different kinds of chocolate, because they said that's like our family. Different flavors that taste even better when they're mixed together." The metaphor was so perfectly Lucas, innocent yet profound, simple yet sophisticated, that both adults found themselves smiling with the recognition that sometimes children understand truths that adults spend years trying to articulate. "Lucas," Dr. Martinez said, "can I ask you something? If someone asked you to describe your family to them, what would you say?" Lucas considered the question with the seriousness he reserved for important inquiries. "I would say that my family is made of people who choose to love each other every day, even when it's hard. I would say that we have some people in heaven who we remember, and some people on earth who we hug. I would say that love isn't something you run out of, it's something that grows bigger when you use it more." He paused, apparently not finished. With his explanation, "And I would say that broken things can become beautiful things if the right people help fix them with love, instead of just trying to make them look the same as before." Dr. Martinez looked at William with an expression of professional amazement. "That," she said quietly, "is the most accurate description of healthy family dynamics I've ever heard from anyone of any age." As the sun began to set over the garden party, painting everything in the golden light that photographers call magic hour, William felt a profound sense of gratitude settle over him like a blessing. Not gratitude for what he had gained, though he was grateful for that, but gratitude for what he had learned. That love is not a finite resource, that healing is not about returning to who you were, but about becoming who you were meant to be. That family is not just about blood or law, but about choice and commitment, and the daily decision to show up for each other. This is what victory looks like, not the absence of loss, but the presence of love strong enough to grow in the soil of sorrow. When we learn that our scars can become the foundation for someone else's healing, we discover the true meaning of redemption. As Lucas's birthday party wound down and the last guests departed with tired children and full hearts, the Hartley family found themselves in the familiar ritual of cleaning up together, a task that had somehow become one of their favorite forms of connection. Eleanor carefully packed leftover cake while humming a tune that Sarah used to sing, her acceptance of their family's musical traditions complete and natural. Jasmine gathered decorations with the efficient movements of someone who had learned to find joy in domestic rhythms. William and Lucas worked together to fold tables and stack chairs, their conversation meandering through the highlights of the day with the comfortable intimacy of a father and son who had learned to treasure each other's company. "Dad," Lucas said as they worked, "Mrs. Patterson's grandson Tommy asked me something today that I didn't know how to answer." "What did he ask?" William responded, settling into the patient listening mode that had become second nature to him. "He asked me if I was sad that my real mom was dead, and I had to have a pretend mom instead." Lucas paused in his chair stacking, his expression serious as he worked through the complexity of the question. "I told him that Mum Jasmine isn't pretend, she's real. And I told him that I'm not sad about having two mums, because having two moms means I'm extra loved, but I don't think he understood." William felt his heart contract with the familiar protective instinct that arose whenever someone questioned the legitimacy of their family structure. But he also felt proud of his son's confident response, the security that allowed Lucas to articulate his truth without defensiveness or doubt. "What do you think about what Tommy said?" William asked, trusting in Lucas's emotional intelligence to guide the conversation where it needed to go. "I think some people don't understand that families can be built in different ways," Lucas replied, with the wisdom of a child who had learned that difference didn't mean deficiency. "I think Tommy has always had the same family, so he doesn't know that sometimes families have to grow and change. But that doesn't make them worse, just different." Jasmine, who had been listening from across the garden, approached with tears in her eyes and pride in her voice. "You know what, Lucas? No, I think you understand something that many adults never learn, that love creates family, not the other way around." "Is that why you and Dad had that special ceremony?" Lucas asked, referring to a small ritual they had held 6 months earlier, where they had formally blended their families by creating a family mission statement and planting a tree together in memory of Sarah and Michael. "Exactly," William confirmed. "We wanted to make it official that we choose each other, that we're committed to growing together, that we honor everyone who helped make us who we are." Eleanor approached with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had something important to say. "Lucas, I want to tell you something that I wish I had understood when I was younger. Love isn't diminished by being shared, it's multiplied. Your love for your mother Sarah doesn't become less because you also love Jasmine. Jasmine's love for you doesn't become less because she also loved Michael. Love grows bigger when it has more places to live." Lucas nodded with the acceptance of a child who had lived this truth rather than just heard it explained. "Like how our garden grows better when we plant more flowers instead of trying to make just one flower bigger." "Exactly. Like that," Eleanor confirmed, marveling again at her grandson's ability to find perfect metaphors for complex emotional realities. As they finished their cleanup and moved inside for the quiet bedtime rituals that anchored their days, William found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 4 years ago, he had been a man frozen by grief, incapable, shy of connecting with his own child, treating his home like a museum of loss rather than a foundation for new life. Tonight, he was surrounded by people who chose to love each other daily, who had learned to honor the past while building the future, who understood that healing was not a destination, but a way of traveling through life. "You know what the best part of today was?" Jasmine said as they tucked Lucas into bed, his room now decorated with artwork from multiple mother figures and filled with toys that represented both inheritance and gift. "What?" Lucas asked, settling into his pillows with the contentment of a child who had been thoroughly celebrated. "Watching you help the littler kids when they got frustrated with the treasure hunt," Jasmine replied. "Seeing how naturally you knew exactly what to say to make them feel better. You're going to spend your whole life helping people feel less alone, and that's the most beautiful thing I can imagine." "I learned that from you and Dad," Lucas said matter-of-factly. "You guys taught me that when people are sad or scared, they mostly just need someone to stay with them and not try to fix everything right away." After Lucas fell asleep, the 3 adults gathered in the living room with tea and the comfortable silence of people who had learned to be present with each other without the need for constant conversation. The evening air drifted through open windows, carrying the scent of the roses Eleanor had helped plant, the herbs Jasmine tended, the memories of laughter that had filled their garden that day. I keep thinking about what Lucas said about families growing and changing, William mused. How did he get so wise about something that took me decades to understand? He learned it by living it, Jasmine replied simply. He learned that change doesn't have to mean loss, that different doesn't mean damaged, that love is strong enough to survive any kind of transformation. Eleanor, who had been quietly knitting, a hobby she'd taken up since moving in with them, looked up from her work. The soft click of her needles had become a comforting soundtrack to their evening conversations, evidence of productivity and purpose that filled the quiet spaces between words. You know, in my generation, we were taught that moving on meant forgetting, that loving again meant being disloyal to what came before. But watching this family has taught me that memory and hope can coexist, that honoring the past and embracing the future aren't contradictory impulses. William reached for Jasmine's hand, finding in the familiar gesture an anchor point for gratitude that felt too large for words. Sometimes I think about that night when I found you fixing Lucas's robot, he said. How you didn't try to stop his crying or distract him from his feelings. You just quietly began the work of repair. I had no idea that's what you were doing for all of us. I was doing it for me too, Jasmine admitted. Every time I helped Lucas heal a little, I healed a little. Every time I saw you learn to be present with him, I learned to be present with my own grief. We all saved each other. Eleanor set down her knitting and regarded them both with the clear eyes of someone who had finally learned to see past her own fears. I think about all the years I wasted being afraid of this exact thing, afraid that if I let myself love again, I would be betraying your father's memory. But love isn't betrayal. Love is the highest form of remembrance. As they sat together in the peaceful aftermath of celebration, surrounded by the evidence of a life built consciously and intentionally from the fragments of loss, they understood that they had achieved something rare and precious, a family that was stronger because of what it had survived, more loving because of what it had lost, more intentional because of what it had chosen to build together. The conversation drifted toward dreams and plans, toward Lucas's upcoming school year, and Eleanor's decision to stay permanently, toward Jasmine's thoughts about returning to work, and William's promotion that would allow him more time at home. Small decisions and large ones, daily choices and life-changing commitments, all woven together into the fabric of a family that had learned to plan for joy while remaining ready for sorrow. Outside, in the garden where they had been married, where Lucas played every day, where Eleanor had learned to find joy again, the tree they had planted in memory of Sarah and Michael was growing steadily toward the light, its roots deep and strong, its branches reaching toward a sky full of infinite possibility. The story of the Hartley family is a testament to the truth that love is not diminished by loss, it is deepened by it. When we have the courage to remain open to connection after devastation, when we choose hope over fear and presence over protection, we discover that our capacity for love is not finite, but infinite. Sometimes the smallest acts of love, fixing a broken toy, sitting quietly with someone's pain, choosing to stay when leaving would be easier, awaken parts of us we thought were dead forever. In a world that often tells us to move on quickly, to get over our losses, to protect ourselves from future pain, the Hartley family reminds us that healing happens not by forgetting, but by learning to carry our love forward. They show us that families can be built from choice as powerfully as from blood, that children can teach adults about resilience, that love multiplies when it's shared. Their story is ultimately about the courage to believe that after the worst thing happens, beautiful things can happen too. Not instead of the pain, but alongside it. Not erasing what was lost, but honoring it by continuing to love, to hope, to build something meaningful from whatever remains. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to know that healing is possible, that love can grow in the soil of sorrow, and that sometimes the most broken people become the strongest families. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the reminder that their story isn't over, it's just beginning a new chapter.